Phonograph record.
Yeah.
It was the first one.
H2HE, I think that one was, yes.
No.
The Van Gogh ones were, the first one was The Least We Can Do Is Wave to Each Other.
That's it.
Yeah, that was the first one, in fact.
Oh, I thought that was the second.
But it was kind of first, second. There was one that was only released in the States, the Aerosol Grey Machine, but that was like...
Yeah, but I saw that
record.
one.
You saw that, yeah?
Yes.
It was one of the things that was released and then deleted straight away, and now it's been released about 2 or 3 times since. You know. The first real one, though, was The Least We Can Do.
Oh, I see, yeah. I heard that one, and a record after. I think it's called Porn Hearts.
Yes. Yeah. This is this is kind of the first period of Van Gogh, really.
Yeah.
That, which went for 3 years.
Yeah, and then I heard some after that, live 2 record set at the Marquee.
Oh, that was Vital. Yes, that was a long time afterwards. So it was, that was right at the end, in fact.
And there was a studio record that came around that.
Quiet Zone. That was with a violinist. Is that right?
With a violinist.
Yeah.
4 members. Violin, bass, drums.
That's right. Yeah, and me.
Yeah.
And then before that, the kind of the great kind of classic periods, if you like, of Van Gogh, for Porn Hearts was one.
Yeah.
Then we broke up for 2 or 3 years and reformed, and there were actually there were 3 albums before the one with the violinist.
Yeah.
God Bluff, World Record, Still Life.
Yeah.
And those 2 really, I think, are kind of classic Van Gogh periods.
Many of the songs that are on the live one.
Yes, there are some songs there. Well, some of those, of course, are the old ones as well, because Van Gogh was always very different live and recorded. In fact, much the same as I always have been as well. And then my solo things occupy entirely different territory as well. Sometimes it's quite like Van Gogh, and sometimes it goes in lots of other directions too.
Out of your solo things, let me see, I think I would have heard probably 2. Fool's Mate.
Yeah.
And another one, Nadia's Big...
Big Chance, yeah.
Yes.
They're the 2, they're actually the 2 kind of pop song ones, really. Fool's Mate was done at the same time that Van Gogh was going in the first place. And so, you know, it was territory away from Van der Graaf's, because Van der Graaf could really play in any style, but not normally the kind of little 3-minute songs. And the idea, in fact, was made after we decided to reform. It was the first time we played together, having decided to be Van der Graaf, but not wanting yet to do that. So there's that again. It's one end of the solo stuff, and the rest. I mean, the other albums. I mean, there are more extreme albums in terms of sound and subjects, length of songs. You know, there's one record that has a 20-minute piece, rather like Lighthouse Keepers on Porn Hearts, in the sense of, you know, there are lots of interlocking tunes and passages that eventually combine, you know, through to music. There's bits of music concrete in there and all sorts of things. And over the last years also there's been 3 or 4 records with, I've quite often toured with quite a normal group, 2 guitars, bass and drums, or piano, guitar, bass and drums. And there are a couple of records that were made more or less with that lineup. And until about 2 years ago, that was mostly the way that I toured. But occasionally with duos and trios, you know, I'd quite like to have a different lineup for each tour, really, so that not everything is known completely about the performance. You know, I don't like the idea of going and playing the same thing. I've never seen the point of that particularly. So I've had lots and lots of changes over the time.
What kind of musicians did you play with?
Well, mostly they've been the musicians from Van der Graaf. Guy, the drummer, has been almost continuous. Obviously, you know, a lot of that is the fact that we have played together as rhythm section for, well, actually now it's nearly 19 years. So the amount of understanding that there is, you know, that one doesn't really even have to look at each other for syncopations, because you know without it entering the brain. And also, of course, in a certain sense, rhythmically, I tend to, because I have his drumming or his percussion in some way imprinted on my psyche, I tend to write in a way that goes in his way of thinking. And in fact, even if I ever play drums myself, I find myself playing, well, what would Guy do? And so he's been almost continuous. The guitarist, though, that I've played with most recently is John Ellis, who's also played with Peter Gabriel and the Vibrators. In fact, those are his other main credits. Nick Potter, the bass player from Van Gogh, comes back. And David Jackson, the sax player, he plays usually on record. He has played live. He's done a couple of live shows. And then there's this other multi-instrumentalist I just discovered on the last record, David Coulter, who's didgeridoo or violin, or he's one of these people who plays, I think, much the same as you. Show me an instrument and and I'll play it. Yes. But see, when I'm coming on this tour, I'm just going to come by myself.
Oh yeah.
And
do you know who?
Oh, beautiful, Beatrice. Did you buy that?
Go and show Daddy. See what he thinks it looks like.
I think it looks like Bess. It is. It's Bess, is it?
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay.
Oh, do you know who's inviting you?
I don't. I know very, very little at the moment about it. I only know it's at the end of October. I have the dates downstairs, and but I don't know really more than that. Nor I don't know the clubs either yet. I'll have to write to you and let you know where they are.
Oh, but I'll probably see them sometime.
Well, I hope so. Yes, I hope there'll be some publicity for it.
Yes.
But yes, so this will be solo, and which again is a fairly standard thing for me, and I think it produces a different kind of music again, because it means obviously that the songs, since so many of the songs, all of them, through Van Gogh ones, solo ones, there are a lot of words and a certain degree of complexity, and sometimes on record, you can't see the song because there's all the arrangement and so on there. So playing completely solo, it's just very bare, the song. I try to play as though it's the moment that a song has actually been written. There's always this first time that something is played. There it is, it's written. And but obviously with all the knowledge of the way to sing it that sing it and play it I've had over the years. And up to now I've just used piano and acoustic guitar. I think this time I'm going to, as with this record, use a number of different things linked, so there's a number of different sounds rather than just the sound of piano. Because there are always problems with piano. Grand piano is the nicest to play, obviously, but then that's a bit selfish in a way, because it's wonderful for me to play on stage, but of course it's notoriously hard to mic up through a PA, if you're going through a PA, and then along with vigorous singing as well. So generally I've used Yamaha electric grands, but then that's a one tone colour really that you have there throughout. So I think maybe I'll try and get some different combinations of sounds and things.
Depending upon the places that you're playing, I wonder. If they're kind of like clubs atmosphere, or if they're going to be like theatres. Yeah. Because in the theatre, a grand piano would work.
Can play, yeah. Yes, that's right. So, well, I'll see. I have to find out about this. But I'm very excited anyway. So I wanted to come for a long time.
Do you know that there's a magazine called Fool's Mate?
Yes, I do indeed. Yes, I've seen Fool's Mate. Yes, indeed.
Yes. It started out, I think, they translated many of your words in Japanese.
Yeah, yes.
And now, well, actually, they've gone off to do more punk, I think, in recent years, because punk is kind of what sells among 15, 16-year-olds in Japan, especially in the countryside these days.
Yeah. Oh, really, in the countryside?
Yes. Country people who want to be in cities.
Yes.
They listen to punk.
Yeah.
Well, many of the songs that you're doing are very lyrically strong. The other day when, before we rang you up, David just showed me a bit of this video that he had, in which... the
BBC one? With
yes, I think so, in which you booked in the hotel in London to write a song.
Yes, that's right. I've done that quite often. It's that hotel. It's actually right by the railway station there. And obviously, I've spent a lot of time over the years in hotel rooms. Yeah. And, when you've spent a lot of time, it becomes different for most people. Most people don't. They stay in a hotel maybe if they're on holiday or on a trip or something, and so there's something exciting and active about the hotel room. Yeah. But, I've stayed in so many that I look on them as very passive places, that it's going to be my room for a little while. And I find it's very good for just cutting yourself off from any outside influences.
Yeah.
I mean, here, obviously, I work downstairs and the family is upstairs, and so there's always lots going on, and it's a different mental discipline. I find for actually writing lyrics that often it's good to just be off like that. But I haven't done it for some time. I mean, lately I found that I can write lyrics obviously anywhere, it's the writing is inside rather than depending on any outside stimulus. But I don't really divide off the words of songs. I think I see myself really as a songwriter, which is a very different thing from being a poet who writes music. I think that the things are very much bound up. Even if one's taking Carmina Burana and using it as spoken word, I think that's the fascinating thing about that. The rhythm that's imposed, the rhythm section that's imposed is actually just in the metre of the words, which makes it a song, really, doesn't it? Even though there's a melody line in the harp, but the real melody line is just kind of somewhere in between things. It's in the water, I suppose. But so that even with that, it becomes something different once you put words and music together. And obviously I always try to write with a lot of with a mixture of logical sense in the words and intuitive things, spaces in between them. But also a large part of it is simply the sound of words. Because one of the wonderful things about English is for any idea there are normally at least 8 or 9 different words. And they obviously have slightly different meanings themselves, but they also have very different meanings in terms of their sound. So there's the actual technical meaning and the sound meaning, and sometimes that's more important, in fact, when it's going to be sung. So I work hard at that end. This is why sometimes I need to go to hotels.
I remember that in many of your earlier songs, the kind of the more popular kind of image attached to them would have been kind of a more darker songs which are showing more darker sides of
Yes, I think that was true to an extent. It's in a way sometimes one of these things that hangs around me like a millstone, because
the song that I heard, especially the first one today that I heard, is very different.
A lot of these are very different. I mean, as I say, every record is that. Some on the last record, some would be as dark. There are a couple of dark songs. Again, it's because in a way, I find it not hard to write happy songs, but there's not less of interest there. But I kind of find that the subjects that demand to have songs written about them generally are the things that you ought to look at, but we don't like to look at too much. And if you're happy, you're just happy, and so you don't normally examine that. You just say, "I'm happy." So there were a lot of songs that were in that area, and sometimes still people think that's all that I write about, or even that I feel negatively or go around in a dark cloud all the time. In fact, my attitude has always been that this is something. One must look at it. If you don't look at things, they never go away. Sometimes they get bigger. So a lot of the songs are in that territory. And again, of course, some of the things that I think pop songs or rock songs, whatever you want to call them, can deal with are things like faith and religion, questions of time. I mean, time is really the big thing that obsesses me, or has over the last 10 years or so. The one thing I keep writing about is time and the way we perceive it, and in terms of our own lives and future and past lives. So I think that songs are an ideal medium for dealing with this sort of stuff. If you simply write prose about it, then you're almost into philosophy, and you have to approach it from a non-emotional angle. If you paint, then of course there's not direct line. So it seems to me that songs can deal with this kind of territory because of the spaces that there are inside them.
When did you start into
music?
Yeah.
Professionally, 19 years ago. I began
15 years ago. That's about 1960.
68, 67, 68.
Uh-huh.
I began writing songs before that, around about 65, but at that time, in 67, I was at university, and I formed Van de Graaff Generator at university, and then so after 9 months, before exams, I decided that really this was the thing that I wanted to do.
Yeah.
In fact, well, it was very much a thing of the moment, and really, if I thought about things then, I imagined I would end up writing prose, writing books, and that maybe I'd be lucky enough to have 2 or 3 years in music. Of course, I realised the moment I started doing it that it was more important than that to me and for me. And so I find myself 19 years later.
Yeah, and with basically the same members.
Yes, basically the same people. Yes. Well, a lot of the same. This thing is the question of communication that you build up with people. A lot of people don't understand why Van de Graaff can break up and yet it's still possible for the musicians to play together, and what's the difference?
Yeah.
There are differences, of course, but when a band is in existence, it dominates everybody's lives, and it's the main thing, and yet the individual musicians still have their own aspect. But it would seem foolish to me to throw away the knowledge that you've built up with different people, of not having to use words, and say, so that you can say to somebody, I would like you to play this like concrete or like stainless steel. If you've played with somebody for a number of years, they know what you mean and what those images mean to you. If it's somebody else you've never met before, then they just go, well, what do you mean? Does concrete mean slam, or does it mean... So this kind of thing is important, really.
So 67, 68 would have been very psychedelic.
That's right, yes. Yes, we were just the tail end of the psychedelic period, and then there was the progressive period. It was in between the two. In both of which we were kind of fitted uncomfortably. Really, we were put in those areas, but it was a bit uncomfortable. It was also the time that people really started doing this thing of playing the same thing every night. Trying to play exactly like records, which is something I've never really liked, and Van de Graaff never did. We had an interesting reputation that one night we'd be brilliant, and 2 nights we'd be average, and 1 night we'd be terrible. But the brilliant nights were really reaching for something that wasn't completely known, and so sometimes you fall. If you try to do that, then sometimes you fall down, obviously. Sometimes you manage to catch it, but you have to accept that you will fall down at times, which is still, I still think that that's a proper approach to music.
Yeah. When was your first record?
It was 69.
There's 2 records, actually.
There's 2, yes. The Aerosol, I think, was just in 68. And then Least We Can Do was 69. Yeah. So it's a long way back.
Has the approach to your songs, have they changed, or they've been quite consistent, haven't they?
Yeah, well, there's been a consistent approach. There's some things that are still the same, I think, in terms of what I think a song can do, lyrically and musically. Obviously, normally I write in a fairly traditional way with some odd spikes. I use some funny time signatures, not to be difficult, but it's just how I hear it, because I've never been formally trained at all. So, in a way, I'm a blank sheet of paper. So some of those things remain the same. The differences, obviously, are that I know so much more about it now, about the way to use words, the way to use music. Obviously I have become a musician as well somewhere along the way. When I began in 68, 69, I was a singer and songwriter, and not really a musician. If I played anything, then I would play more or less the chords that I wrote the song with, but I wasn't comfortable. This again, in turn, I learned the psychology of being a musician, really, from the others in Van de Graaff, who were all very good musicians. And somewhere along the way became more of a musician, which in turn meant that I could write slightly more complicated songs, which meant that I had to become a slightly better musician in order to play them, and so on. So there's obviously an accumulation of knowledge, but still the fundamentals are the same, I think. And naturally as well, the other main difference is that I'd be foolish if I tried to write songs from the perspective of a 19-year-old.
Oh,
because although a lot of people in their 40s and so on seem to want to write songs about going out partying and doing the 19-year-old things, I think it devalues the form really, because the form can hold much more than that, and I think can deal with adult songs. So I try to write adult songs, or universal songs, really, I should say.
Were you traveling around a lot in those early days?
Oh yes, nearly all the time. Yeah.
So were you writing most of your songs while you were traveling?
Some. In the very early days of Van Gogh, we played at the first we played only in Britain. And that would be, I suppose, 3 or 4 times a week. I obviously had a lot of songs already, and then the rest I could write at home. After we'd been going for about a year or so, we toured nearly all the time, mostly in Europe. Sometimes I'd write on the road, but I mean, there's always, you have a week at home, and particularly at that time, if I had any time off, then I'd be writing away. And still, it doesn't take so long to write songs, really. Once you have the idea, then it's all right. And I think generally I tend to write quite fast once I know. I mean, maybe a day or 2 days to write something once the idea is there. But no, always until, in fact, even in solo days, I used to tour an awful lot. Van Gogh used to tour 8 months a year, something like that. And then I still did for 4 or 5 months. Until now, as you see, family, and it becomes more important to be at home. So now I tour very little, in fact. This time will be the first I was in the States 6 weeks ago, and there'll be nothing from then until Japan in October. And even after that, I'm doing maybe 5 days in England and 2 weeks in Europe, and that's all for this year. Again, it's important, not only from the family point of view, but because I want to be fresh each time and not just go around the world, being a kind of hologram of myself. It's still important to me to be excited about playing, which if I don't do it too often, I can be.
How do you feel about the music scene now, like compared to the days when you started?
Well, it's very complex, really. Obviously, first of all, technologically, it's a completely different universe. I mean, when I started, it was 8-track recording was the norm. Nothing existed. Nothing. Synthesizers didn't exist. The effects would be a tape machine and a plate echo, and that was it. Period. So there are obviously many more possibilities now. On the other hand, then it meant that you had to push a lot more. Now, of a million wonders of sound are there waiting at your fingers. You just kind of close your eyes in the studio and just go bomb on a button on the rack, and something else will come out. Instead of sometimes deciding, well, we want to get this kind of thing and having to spend a long time doing it. So there's a balance works out there. I think generally the balance works out between different times, much as it does in people's lives. It's obviously now much more industrial. I mean, music now is much more important as a business than it was then. There was something cowboy about it still in the days of '69 or so. I mean, even in terms of playing live, maybe more than records, because we used to be sent out to Europe, as I say, and nobody understood at that point really how to do concerts. They wouldn't understand that you had to have electricity. And now you can go around the world, and there are always 2 or 3 promoters and different sizes of halls, and everything will be sorted out. Which, I mean, I think that my regret there is maybe for younger bands, because there was a real element of adventure when we went. Many experiences that I've had were quite extreme. I wouldn't want to have them again, but I'm glad that I had them. But I know at the same time that now, because the system is more organised, it's possible for somebody to go off for a 6-month world tour and just see the 25 people on the crew and never see the outside world or have a chance to understand the culture that they're passing through, which has always been, if you like, a selfish attitude that I have. I like the idea of going to different places and working, obviously, by performing, because it means that you're there, you have a meaning in terms of the place rather than just passing through and observing. And because you're in there, it means you have the possibility to try and get some understanding that would take you a month of just walking around and looking. So that is obviously a change. As far as the music goes, I think it's an interesting time at the moment.
At the moment?
I think at the moment it's an interesting time, not because of now, but because of what will be. I think that, now it is very big business, obviously, in terms of record companies. They are looking for the enormous sellers and banking on...
It's more oriented towards videos and kind of like visual things. And records, I think that album sales have gone down.
Yes, certainly. But my belief is that this is a kind of a peak of that kind of thing, because there's enormous uniformity about music. It's all chasing this one market. It's all got the same kind of video, the same kind of sound, the same system, which obviously in a way the audience wants, or quote wants. My belief is that already that wave has broken, and that in the next 2 or 3 years one will probably see many more minority musics, always staying minorities, but achieving some kind of substantial, steady state. Because I think,
mean like minority music in terms of like released through more independent units?
Maybe to independent units. Maybe, if I was running a large record corporation, I would be very keen to, instead of trying to get everything to be the great hit, which is I think what they're doing at the moment, taking interesting people, they then try to put them into this one route of the hit.
Well, not really, because I think that, in my case, the company that I'm in is, they have some artists who produce hits and who are told to continue to produce them, and then there are people like me who don't produce hits.
Well, this is perfect. This is I think right thinking.
And this kind of thing started with when they realized that people like, I guess Brian Eno were making that kind of music available, which would be being used for various things like background music and which was music which was also useful in various things, but which wasn't going to go to the top tens or anything. So that they would, to get that kind of music out, they would have to have a hit seller to get the money.
Oh yes,
to make that music.
This again is right, of course. I don't knock companies for doing that. They're companies, they have to survive. But I think this is the right kind of thinking, because also if you're just dealing with the hits, you have there's a very short time span, even for the most successful people. People who are successful on a global level, it's still only 2 or 3 years, and then you have to find another one. Whereas cultivating quote minorities, I don't mean to assign any value necessarily, but into areas of ambient music, jazz, all these kind of things, it's going to have a longer time span, and also I think it's going to have my real feeling is that the audience is going to demand this kind of thing, never to compete with the enormous, the platinum records and 12 million sellers and what have you, but there's almost a law that says that something that achieves that state doesn't have so much soul inside it, of whatever kind of music it is. So I believe that this is the way that companies will go in the future. Whether it relates to me or not, because I honestly don't know. I have no idea by now of what area of music I fit into at all. I don't think it's rock music as such. I don't think it's pop music as such. It's not really jazz. It's simply the stuff that I do. So this is simply my observations for other things, like the different areas of jazz and so on. And I think this will happen over the next 2 or 3 years. The other thing will continue, maybe even videos now I think is starting to roll down, because the average member of the audience, how many more times can you be excited by a thunder flash going video, and still there are wonderful videos made, and that will continue. But I think that the possibility is there. Well, it's actually a point where the coin is flying through the air. Either the possibility is there, and we can look forward to generally and globally having a healthy music for the rest of the century. Or well, I hope so too. I believe so. Or one just kind of goes, oh well, yes, that was a good 20 years, lots of interesting things out of rock music, and now all it is boof baff, endless 8-note guitars and videos. I believe that it's going to be the other way, and that the possibilities that are still there in this loose form, because I mean still the possibilities are so enormous, because you don't have to go through the conservatory route that you obviously have to do for quote modern serious music. You don't in fact have to take the jazz route of having played with the famous musician, then forming your own group and getting the hot young guns in and so on, which is again fine, but a different way. If you have the will, you can go in and make whatever you want. So, but there's always an awful orthodoxy about rock music as well, as one sees with punk music. Say, I mean, by now it's not even a joke. I mean, the original things, of course, were absolutely vital and necessary. But now, anybody who wanders around going, I'm a punk in 1985. Is literally 10 years away from any kind of idea of what the original point was and what the original. The whole basis of the music originally was say, enough of that, let's have something different. And now 10 years later, still people get up, and now the something different is just completely embedded in rock, and it's just rama-lama. So, but as I say, I think I'm positive about things, and I think that they will go in that route. And your company, as I say, that's absolutely right thinking. And if I was running a record company, that's exactly what I'd do. You have to, of course, have hits to pay for everything. But then even in not in any kind of philanthropic way or kind of charitable arts way, for the health of the company, you have to have things on different levels. And I think that's even on the basis, this is why I think I'm positive, I think that's on the basis of just sound business sense rather than any kind of artistic value.
Well, one thing was that the early 80s for me was kind of like a very dull period musically, because every band sounded the same. You had the same voicing on every record. You could turn on Duran Duran and some other band, and they sound the same. The voice sounds the same. Everything sounds the same. And I think it was a very.
It's negative, really. I mean, the problem really was that I think the main thing about the 80s actually has been the technology, the jumps of technology in recording and performing. It's been absolute revolution, really. And what one heard in the early 80s was really just, I mean, it still happens to a certain extent. Trevor Horn discovers a wonderful new sound, makes an astonishing record, and 10 minutes later, because in terms of this technology, obviously, if somebody discovers a sound, it takes you a tenth, a hundredth of the time, once you hear a sound, to be able to make a copy that's maybe not 100% but close enough. So Trevor Horn invents a sound, 10 minutes later every other record is also going, wow. And this is because it's effectively because the technology has got so many possibilities, too many possibilities, people channel down there. So I think it's very, very early in terms of that. That's on the recording side. On the instrument side, of course, the whole MIDI area and the use of the new synths and sampling and so on. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff to be done there as well, in a positive and musicianly and soulful sense, rather than the way that it's been used so far, which is more or less it's getting control or replacing musicianship. I mean, not really being negative, but that's the way it's being used, rather than pushing for the things that it can do. That's really why I'm interested in doing this, sticking the performance into the computer, just two hands, and then obviously something is playing just the whole of the two hands, but then to take out other things, it's a world of possibilities. It means that at last, obviously traditionally you'd record your sound and your performance simultaneously. Now to be able to record your performance and then decide what sound will suit what part is a wonderful tool, really. This is number 2 here. So yes, I think this must come forward now. It's,
There was also a whole lot of nostalgia in the early 80s. I think. The psychedelic created because of it, probably a reaction.
Yes, that's right. I think the other thing that characterises it that's negative about the 80s is that there aren't so many songs written now. I mean, I speak as one coming from that time. Still, I have this idea of a song. Usually it has to have a beginning, a middle and an end. So it might not, I don't like things that repeat, and I don't very rarely have choruses that are the same, but more or less you have the verse, chorus, mid, verse, chorus structure. But often these days, because of the technology, people don't find that necessary. You can write a good chorus and half an idea for a verse, and what you're going to do is do your half an idea for a verse, then a chorus, then just a quarter of the verse, and then chorus at the end to bash it into people's heads. Now, and those choruses will all be the same as well. So somewhere in there, it seems to me that the craft of song has gone. But I think that will come round again as well.
About the craft of songwriting.
Oh, the craft of songwriting, yeah. I would know. But if you have more about that, and we're at this point, Yes. About my approach to it.
Okay,
songwriting, well, one of the main things about songs for me is that music obviously is non-specific. I mean, it obviously carries messages, both in terms of emotional message and musical message, but it's not dogmatic. And that's something that I try to preserve in songs normally. I don't like the idea of songs that just have one meaning, and that's the meaning, and there you go. Again, this is one of the problems of having the endlessly repeating choruses, that you can only have one meaning there. So I usually try to write songs that have 2 or 3 lines that you can follow down. So if you start thinking along one line, you can follow it all the way down the song, and it means that. But at the same token, there are 2 other lines as well, and the quote true meaning of the song actually is a combination of those and none of them at the same time, so that I don't really I sing an I normally in the song, but that isn't necessarily me. It's a character in the song, and even the character doesn't know, he's not saying exactly it is like this or it is like that. And I try to put this in whether it's a love song or a more philosophical song or something like that, because I think it's important really that the process of writing songs, I mean, for me, when I write a song, is to clarify something for myself. It's to understand for myself in this slightly obscure way, because it's not a specific meaning. And if I can get it outside in that way, whether it's a story or just playing on words or something talking about dreams, time, faith, something like that, I can get it outside and see, yes, sometimes it's like this, sometimes it's like that. There's a bit of it in that song. Then I think what happens for somebody else hearing it is that they can get the same kind of effect, but not from me. It's not me telling somebody this is how it is. It's them relating to the song. So it's important in that case for me not to be saying it is like this, it is so, and not to be dogmatic. So really that's one of my main efforts, whatever kind of song it is, so that in a way the song exists between me and the audience. Otherwise, it would have been insufferable for me to go on for 19 years constantly saying this is what I think, this is what I think, this is what I think to people. I'd be bashing away. So that the important thing really there is, first of all, that it's the junction between me and the audience, and secondly that there is doubt or uncertainty somewhere in the song, or it's not dogmatic. On a technical level, I like to have something different between different verses and choruses musically, as well as lyrically. I don't normally like choruses that repeat the same thing. They're quite rare. I mean, there may be only 5-10% of my songs have choruses that come around and are the same. Usually there's an extra. There's either a change of words, or there's the insertion of an extra couple of lines of music, Very many of my songs, in fact, are a little bit like jigsaw puzzles. As I realise when I'm teaching them to other musicians, that I usually have about 9 component parts that fit together in different ways. So I always have to teach people the 9 component parts, and then say, right, now call part A a verse. And that's the first kind of verse, and then take that verse and add a little bit of 2, that's the second verse, and it usually works out like that. So that there's a kind of continuousness about it, rather than the kind of hiccup of a song, that you reach a certain point and then go back to the start and so on. I like it to flow through. Which is most exemplified, of course, in the opera. That's the absolutely continuous and no choruses or anything.
Yes.
So.
And you're writing opera.
Yes. This is The Fall of the House of Usher, which has been I have been writing it for 15 years now, and it's now almost written in the song sense, in the melody sense. And the next stage, obviously, is to record it and have other people singing it. And it bears some relationship to song. It's really like an enormous song. I'm simply doing the music as well on this instead, rather than lyrics. I have Chris Smith, who started Van de Graaff with me, is doing the libretto.
Oh, I see.
So, which is actually quite interesting. I don't think if I'd been working on it entirely by myself, I couldn't have done it for 15 years. But he presents me with another piece, and then I present him with another piece, and we egg each other on. It's also quite interesting for me. Simply to write music rather than words as well.
And what does he do?
He writes songs and he writes musicals generally, and he works for an architect. He does a mixture of things. He writes songs for other people and generally musicals. But in fact, I still do some of his songs occasionally because I think he's very good. He also writes tunes. So we've divided up the responsibilities. Yeah.
Do you think of when you're writing your songs? Do you think of them as kind of writing like short stories, like in a detached manner?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. Very much so. Short stories, or maybe little. Yes, they divide. I think they divide in a certain way. There's the ones that are like short stories. Yeah. There's others that are like little scenes from films. Yeah. Quite often when I'm writing, this is especially love songs, I have a picture in my mind of a room as a frozen frame from a film, and then there are others that are maybe more, as I say, more philosophical, but usually set in the same way that a short story can contain an idea as well as a story. This is usually what I try to do, especially these days. And this is maybe the big change in my being a professional songwriter between now and 68 when I started. I didn't really appreciate how much one could do that, and in exactly this way of a short story or an extract from a film, you can compress lots of experiences and lots of ideas into one little thing. So they're very much in that area, yes.
Well, would you say that your earlier songs are more based on your own experience?
Yeah, this again is something else. There are early songs that are in which the I is I. This is obviously naturally there's an inclination to write like that in any case when you're in late teens or early 20s. The world at that age is very much in your head, and as one gets older, you see different ways of living and understand more about other people's points of view or other aspects to the world.
Most of the songs on Fool's Mate, they're quite
early.
Songs,
they're very early, yes. They, in fact, most of them are are ones that were there. They were there quite early, yes. The I's, yes. I think this is. I wouldn't have felt happy carrying on just writing about me, and I would think in a way that would be false trading. I wouldn't want to sell my life to songs, or can start regarding the living of my life as being source material. I think this is something actually that anybody who writes or does any creative endeavour, at one point or another, you have to realise you cannot just live your life in order to provide source material, because in the end the source material will become corrupt. You have to live a life outside, and then you come across the material that you work on by that. But it has to work in that way. So obviously at some time I began to realise that, and really at that point I think it was when I began to write proper characters in songs, so that there would be an I in a song, and I would sing the I think, I do, but in exactly the same way as an actor.
When did you first kind of realize that kind of on a more conscious level?
Probably in the period between the two Van der Graafs. There seems to be 70. I mean, because the Van der Graaf songs in any case were always slightly more impersonal, because I was writing for a band. We'd all anything that we played had to. For the music to be played honestly, even if the others weren't singing it, the concepts and the feelings involved in the music had to be ones with which the others agreed. I mean, I think it's unreasonable to expect a musician to play. Well, if it's a band, then it's different. You know, it's one of the differences that people outside wouldn't really understand. You know, if you're making your record, you can ask a musician to play anything. You know, he may disagree with the whole idea of the song, but if it's your project, you can say, "Please, will you just do this like you do?" And there's no problem. But if it's a band, then everyone has to agree about what the whole thing is. Even if the drummer is just playing a backbeat, you know, he still has to agree or be prepared to debate at least what the song is about. Therefore, of necessity, they tended to be more impersonal, broader songs. And in the period between the two Van der Graafs, where I did 4 solo albums, in fact, which were more personal in a way, there I think I because I've been doing it for 4 or 5 years, at that point I began to realise this other thing. It's obviously, I hope, you know, the learning never stops, and not only the discoveries about how to do things, why one does them, what the result is, continues. The what it is changes, because if that isn't the case, then it isn't really happening. So nothing is ever definitive.
In your solo records, when you had other like Van der Graaf members playing on it, were their attitudes towards it more kind of like session musicians?
Yes, well, exactly in this way I've just said. You know, the responsibility was obviously mine. So there was no reason for them to argue about something which they might have argued about if it was in the Van der Graaf arena. By the same token, I had no reason to argue either, because it was my project. But this is again, I mean, it's hard for people who aren't musicians to understand this area of things. Obviously, any time a musician plays properly, he's playing with his soul. But still, there are different ways of doing it. And sometimes, you know, the soul and your beliefs are more important, and other times simply your technique is important. So this awareness of whose project something is something. It's very shifting ground that I don't think people outside can conceive of. Really, it's a very complex cauldron. Obviously, the area of musicians' arrangements and what their commitment should be. I mean, session musician generally has has something of a negative feeling about it, but in fact, you know, it's the most fantastic thing, really. You know, it can be a great thing to come in and just for somebody to say, "I want this feeling," and you play it and then go away again. You know, it's been a kind of a pure potentially that's been a pure activity in a way that, you know, where you've had the idea for the project and you've planned it for a month and you've been recording it for 2 months. You can never come in just with that pure and then walk away again, which is obviously I mean, one tries to do this naturally. I think anyone who's serious about music tries to do that, however long you've been doing it. That every time you record something, it's the all. Well, it is the all important. If you're a musician, a singer, a writer, the moment that you're you're performing, the world depends upon you, or at least your contribution to the world is that. But it's hard if it's your project. If you're just coming in for somebody else, then it can be quite exciting. I did this for. I sang 3 songs on one of Robert Fripp's solo albums. It very much in that sort of way. Went to New York, heard the backing tracks, saw the lyrics, went in, sang 2 takes of each of the songs. That's it. So, you know,
which record was that?
Explosion. Wonderful to sing in that way, because that was exactly like being a guitarist going in and saying, you know, it's quite normal for guitarists to say, right, go in now, can you give me a solo over this? Here are the chords.
Yeah.
To have that singing was great. You know, it's not just that important lack of knowledge that means you can cross over some boundaries that maybe you shouldn't cross over because you don't know they're there, and actually you can find something very positive there.
Out of the earlier Vandergraafs, when I mentioned Pawn Hearts, do you kind of see that as one of the
Pawn Hearts is one of the classic Van der Graaf ones, yes. That was the last one of that first period. Yeah. And I still think it's actually quite an interesting record. I mean, obviously from a technical point of view, it is old technology, but it's the sound of the thing is still quite contemporary. I think. The same with the other really classic one I would say is Godblath, which was the first. Okay, what happened? I can't see anything.
No.
Pat a cake. Pat a cake. Baker's man. Bake me a cake.
No.
Fastest you can. Sorry, just can't. Yes, those. Godblath is well. I mean, there are none of the records that I reject because I think all of them were done to the best of. Girls, can you go upstairs, please, or not talk and chat just here. Either go to the front room or upstairs. But if you can be quiet, please, because we're recording. I don't reject any of them because they were done to the best of abilities, and you know, both writing, performing, arranging, playing. But Godbluff has 4 songs on it, and they somehow kind of really connect very well with each other. There are obviously some other peak songs on other ones. On the record Still Life, one of the songs Still Life is, and a couple are important, but as complete records. In fact, of all of this stuff, they're about to release a compact disc of each period, a compilation of things from the first, from Least We Can Do, H2HE, Pawn Hearts, and the later ones as well, Godbluff, which will be quite interesting, I think. You know, especially because obviously even in terms of the original tapes, the quality is much better than pressings were then. So you know, it'll be quite a good thing, I think.
Yeah, and this is going to come out?
Yeah, quite soon, I believe. It's the power of Virgin, because Virgin now own all the rights. You see,
I see.
So, and they can just kind of produce compact discs till the cows come home, really. You know?
Didn't the inner sleeve of Pawn Hearts have a kind of psychedelic colour to it?
Yes, that was actually the house where we rehearsed all of that. So, yeah, there's quite a lot of psychedelic stuff around in the various Van der Graaf phases.
Yeah. What kind of material do you think you'll be centering upon when you go?
It'll be all over the place. And maybe some Van der Graaf things, and obviously there's a limit to time. I usually play about 14, 15 songs. Obviously, since I have all of these new ones, which are based on solo performance, I'll be doing some of them. But generally, I mean, this is a very short tour, of course, but normally if I go on tour, I have, I suppose, about 40 songs that are current ones. And each night, I can choose which ones to do. I know, throughout Van der Graaf's time and mine, there's never ever been a show that's exactly the same. Each song has been different itself, but as well, there's never been exactly the same sequence of songs. Obviously, at any given time, there are some that will be played every night because they're the newest or most favourite and so on. But I take things from all over the place. Some, you know, back 19 years ago or yesterday. And it really depends on, you know, I get my bit of paper out only half an hour before, and then try and work out an order that's in a way like a record order. You know how important it is to get things the right way round. So I try to do that and then go from there. So it'll be a whole range of things. You know, some things that maybe people know about with drums and organs and saxes and complete assault and battery of sound, and maybe I'll just play them with guitar and voice. Other things that are obviously originally known as just simple performances. I think it's one aspect of this kind of performance as well is it's very good for voice, because obviously if you're playing with a band, however good the PA is, there are nuances of voice and obviously dynamics that you simply can't do because you always have to be on top. But one of the things of playing solo is that obviously I can drop to nothing virtually, and that's really quite exciting.
Do you wind up like raising your voice more with a band?
Yeah, inevitably, yes. And being more...
The PAs must have been bad in those days.
They didn't really exist, no, they were PAs of that size. I mean, literally, 4 speakers, and 4 speakers, 1 microphone, literally 1 microphone for vocals, 1 snare drum, and no mixer. So, it's Neolithic, really. It's the Stone Age of things. No lights. But at the same time, the fundamentals remain the same.
So when's the project that you're now working on going to be?
I'm hoping that it'll be early November.
Out in
November. I hope so. It all depends how quickly I finish it, really. But it should be early November. Yes.
What company is it now?
It's Virgin over here. I think it'll be Virgin, or kind of the two before this have been on Foundry, which has been an independent but out through Virgin. This one might be a different label, but it'll be marketed by Virgin. And it's Virgin in most of Europe. I think in Japan it's Virgin as well. Yes, I'd like it to be in November, because, as I said, 19 years I would have been doing this. It's the 25th album, and I think, a lifetime's amount of work. I'd be happy with 50 records, I think, as long as the other 25 can be all as different and varied as these have been, and that it's not just normal. I think 50 would be a reasonable target for a lifetime, if I'm graced with a long life. And I've been doing it 19 years, and in November I'll be 38, so I will have had half of my life. So it seems to me that the numbers are kind of lining up, that I ought to have this one out in November. I think one should sometimes pay a bit of attention to these things, really, and observe the anniversaries. Yes.
So is this your record that you're making now? Do you feel that it's really a record to celebrate?
I think so, yes. Yes, I think so, yes. Well, still, as you were saying in the car, that it's always the newest one, is the one that you like. If that's not there, and if you're not excited, the excitement is obviously different now for me. It's not the same thing as first going into a studio and just getting a record for the first time. You can never repeat that. But unless you're still excited and positive about music, well, there's no point in doing it, really. And I love doing it, and I'm maybe obsessive about it. I work away at it all the time, but it's still there. So yes, I think so.
Did you say that the Fall of the House of Usher is it finished? Or?
The writing is finished. The writing is finished, but now the arrangement and obviously the way of the world, have to persuade somebody that it's a good business venture, because to put it on will be a very big, much bigger thing than I could manage. So, but it's now close. Having been going for 15 or 16 years, now it could be a year and it could be out, which would be very exciting.
So you have many exciting plans?
Yeah. Oh yes, always. Yeah. Lots of things to do.